Good morning. Continuing in Philippians chapter 1. This is kind of a new section, beginning in verse 12 down through 18, and I think it highlights Paul's core passion. It reminds me of Romans chapter 1, where he says, I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it's the power of God to salvation. Paul is about the gospel. Now, he is in prison as he writes this. I mentioned in a previous video when we started Philippians, he's in prison in Rome, and he writes this, and you'll see his reference to imprisonment in the next three verses. I'm going to read 12, 13, and 14, but we're going to spend a couple of days talking about these verses. So verse 12, I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel. What's happened is advancing the gospel, is pushing it beyond any kind of things that come against it. Well, what's happened to him? Well, verse 13, so that it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to all the rest that my imprisonment is for Christ. That's what's happened to him. So he's saying my imprisonment has advanced the gospel. In verse 14, and most of the brothers, having become confident in the Lord by my imprisonment, are much more bold to speak the word without fear. We'll get to verse 14 on a different day. But for now, I just want you to focus on this idea that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel, and what's happened to him is his imprisonment. Paul sees the negative things that have happened in his life that would be to the naked eye negative, he's in prison, to the experience that he would feel, the weight and the constant daily grind of being in prison, where he could get down in the mouth, he could be getting upset about it. Instead, he looks and says, look, I was put here because I have a conviction for the gospel, and I'm having an opportunity to suffer for Christ, and people are seeing that I'm suffering for Christ, and the gospel is getting proclaimed in the prison, and the gospel is getting proclaimed outside of the prison, and now my suffering is actually advancing the gospel. Here's what Paul has. Paul has a theology. He has a way of looking at the world that sees the advancement of the kingdom for the sake of God in Christ, with God exalted and the gospel at the center. Oftentimes, when we endure difficulty, we don't have a theology. We have what we could call a meology. We have us at the center, right? For Paul, you've heard the phrase, no pain, no gain. For Paul, it's like he says, my pain is the gospel's gain. My pain is their gain. My pain is the kingdom's gain. That's the kind of perspective that someone who has a passion for the gospel, that's how they view suffering in their life. Because if they're suffering, they're not suffering for wrongdoing. If the gospel's their passion, the chances are they're suffering because they're trying to do right. They're trying to go against the cultural grain. They're going against maybe the grain of the ethics of what their business is. They're going against the grain of how people are envisioning things in a secular world, and they're trying to advance God's kingdom. So they may face hardship. The book of 1 Peter talks all about this. But if the gospel is our passion, then when we suffer for the sake of the gospel, we can honestly say our pain is someone else's gain. We get in that way rid of a meology where we're at the center, and we garner a theology where God is at the center. May the Lord help us to follow this example and celebrate the advancement of the gospel, even if it means negativity, stress, strain, and challenge for us. Take care.